Hey everybody, it's Master Gallengeist here, bringing you my review for My Hero Academia Season 5 on Toonami. And I apologize, I'm still getting over some kind of allergy, cold, hoopla, but I'm on the better back end, so apologies on that. So, Season 5 of My Hero Academia, I enjoyed mostly overall. I liked how we pretty much got into kind of a training thing between Class A and B in the beginning. Then a little bit of kind of in between one off things as we got to like the Endeavor Agency arc. And then we get to the like My Villain Academia shit at the end. That is what really drug this season down for me, and it really kind of sucked that it was the end portion. Now, it's mainly in the execution of how certain things worked, more so than what we got throughout it. So, last season, we kind of ended off with Endeavor fighting, of course, that Nomu and kind of cementing himself more as the number one hero. We see him and Hawks kind of dealing with all this stuff going on, and we see that Endeavor pretty much tries to position himself as like the new number one and dealing with all that kind of stuff, while Hawks pretty much gets thrust upon himself to be this undercover dude trying to figure out the Meta Liberation Army and everything kind of going on with that, because that is a group that has been politically active since like Quirks really much came into being, and pretty much were arguing for the fact that nothing should restrict people's use of quirks and everything like that. And you can definitely see that kind of side, but it then creeps into pretty much power structures where if you have the best kind of quirk and are able to do everything, that power gets out of hand exponentially. Granted, there was the other side of you get essentially like humans versus mutants kind of shtick going on, where they want to take out anybody and stop anybody with quirks. So they at least do a pretty good job of kind of echoing the kind of things that we've seen, like in Marvel Comics with the X-Men, with mutants and humans and all that kind of stuff going on. Granted, it did get to a point where the mutants have now outnumbered the humans in that kind of scenario, which would be an interesting kind of factor for them to kind of play off in Marvel Comics as they ever get to that fact. But he's trying to figure out kind of what their whole thing is and trying to also get into the League of Villains and all that kind of stuff. Timeline wise, he's more in the beginning doing the stuff with the League of Villains and being pointed contacted with Dobby. And they do a good job of ratcheting up the tension and making Hawks a very interesting and kind of cool character, where he really wants to be a hero. That is his main and ultimate true goal, but we see that he has to show all these sides of being a kind of lazy hero to a degree, so that way people don't expect as much out of him doing subterfuge, and then also being kind of tired with the status quo and trying to ingratiate himself within the League of Villains to get more information to stop them from doing their attacks. I really feel for Hawks and am kind of afraid for what could potentially happen for him as this kind of like goes on. Now, granted, I have not read the manga up to the latest stuff, so I don't know what happens to him. So it'll be interesting to see how his kind of shakes out in this series. We also get more kind of family drama with Endeavor trying to teach Todoroki kind of more stuff that is he's able to do with his flame, and they balance it out a lot, because this is kind of a hard thing because of how bad it never was, but also seeing like Todoroki kind of come into his own and explain his kind of reasons and what he kind of wants to do, that kind of pops down later on. But it's a thread throughout that Endeavor wants to be a better father, even though he's been pretty fucking shitty. It is an interesting kind of arc that we see him kind of like go through in this season, mainly in the Endeavor arc that we get to. Now, bringing that kind of up kind of sets us for the stage of kind of like where the beginning happens. We see that Midoriya also has this kind of weird dream where his quirk, One for All, is speaking to him in his sleep, and it like activated in his sleep, and he's kind of freaked out. And All Might's like, I ain't never had that kind of shit happen. As we were learning that he's talking with previous owners of One for All, namely the first one as well, telling them that like the time is pretty much coming soon. Pretty much the kind of singularity and all that kind of stuff going on with like quirks. Pretty much you get this kind of build up to pretty much the next kind of evolution, being able to handle and utilize all these different quirks and all the kind of challenges that would kind of come with that. Granted, that's not been completely spelled out here, but that's kind of the gist that I'm getting from it. So Midoriya's kind of have to keeping that in his head, in his pocket, as he's kind of dealing with that throughout what starts to be going on, as we see Class A and Class B have a pretty well kind of mini tournament. I like seeing that we essentially had a kind of like stopgap where we were able to have action and see how our characters have learned and progressed throughout the series, while it not being a complete kind of tournament show. We see that Class B, even though they have not been in all the different kind of scenarios that Class A has been, are able to put up a pretty good fight, as it pretty much evens out. I kind of liked how it was handled, where both classes have their strengths and their weaknesses, and it's used as a learning exercise of not, this class is better than you, or these people on their quirks are better than you. Figure out how to kind of do it. And we see that the one quirk user who can like brainwash people is being potentially brought in to the class, and seeing him kind of work around and kind of figure out how to use his quirk. And that's a kind of really good thing that I like that they kind of explored in this. Certain quirks actually would lend themselves to people being more villainous, like this dude who's able to use his brainwashing quirk, and Monoma with his ability to kind of copy quirks and everything. They still want to be heroes, and they're still driven to that purpose. And I'm like, yeah, you have to figure out how to utilize these as effectively as possible and not fall into the temptations that they could have. Because, I mean, shit, using that brainwashing quirk that he's able to do, and then he could be a really interesting villain. But he seems to be going more along the lines of a different kind of Aizawa, as he's teaching him how to use his kind of weapons and everything. I'm like, that's pretty kind of cool. I'd kind of like to see how that works. And we see that it doesn't really feel that Class A or Class B gets really shit upon here. It's hard to really do that, because honestly, Class A has gotten the most kind of character development and kind of nice progressions in how people are able to utilize their quirks. I'm going to come back to that kind of thing later on, because the opposite kind of happens with the villains. It's almost like, shit, we've shown a lot of good progress with these heroes, and it's done in a nice kind of way that's not glacier slow, but it's not super fast where fucking Deku just suddenly starts shitting rockets out of bumfuck nowhere. That doesn't happen. However, we get to a side of like, kind of like shooting off point at the end that's kind of confusing to me, that I would almost wish that they had stopped this season or drawn out the Endeavor arc a little bit, and then just ended it there, and then did a better job adapting the My Villain Academia arc. But we see certain characters doing better and certain characters doing worse here. Like Todoroki and Ida, they pretty much get into a draw, but they figure out what their weaknesses are and are able to kind of like move on and figure out new game plans of attack. We also see the rest of kind of class, they kind of shift around with that. The best one that we saw was that Bakugo is able to harness his kind of stubbornness and is able to effectively utilize his team, because everybody's pretty much was on the track that Bakugo is a selfish kind of dick cheese. And seeing him kind of acknowledge that fact and take steps to rectify that, because he sees that he needs to do that to better compete against Deku, is really kind of cool, because he's like, listen, if you need help, I will save you, as he's like going around and doing his thing. Now granted, this is also getting closer to winter, so he also has to kind of like change up how he's able to utilize his quirk because of the cold and everything. That factors in more in the Endeavor arc. But seeing him be kind of an effective leader, even though he is still an angry, shouty little strange rage boy, it's not that I hate Bakugo, he just doesn't jive with me that well, but I do like how he is turning into a very good and competent kind of Vegeta and like character without them pretty much always intentionally kind of like fucking him over that Vegeta has pretty much become. And him kind of cementing himself in the top 3 of the class, him, Deku, and Todoroki. Then we get into Deku's, and this is where it starts getting really kind of cool and interesting. And once the like manga shortages like even out and everything, I really want to get more into this because we see that Deku is out of nowhere is able to utilize a different quirk that we learn as Blackwing. And he's kind of freaking out, is unable to control it. The teachers, of course, are like, all right, let's just let this ride for a minute. Uraraka is able to kind of come in and like get to him, see what's kind of going on. Brainwashed Kid's able to kind of like snap him into place a little bit as he's able to kind of talk with that quirk's user, and he's like, yeah, the thing is, you got the capabilities of all our quirks in you. You have to learn how to use it and everything, but it's also gotten stronger because of One For All is able to do all these kinds of things of like boosting, of course, the quirk, and of course he's not used to completely using One For All at this point, and he's not even have used this quirk either, so that's why it's kind of going out of control and everything, and he kind of like mentally blocks it for a little bit because he doesn't want it to get out of control and hurt any other people. So Bakugo is able to win his thing, and Deku's able to win his, and they kind of figure out everything. Deku, of course, has to keep it on the down low for the minute before him and Bakugo. And it's really kind of cool. I'm glad Bakugo is getting brought into this, as he is thought of as an important kind of part of this, since he knows about Deku's secret and everything, and that All Might is able to tutor him as well, as he's like, wow, you're able to use other quirks, and how he saw all these other ones, except for like 2 of them. There's not a lot of information on them, and they of course start to train, but Deku's like, I put myself in kind of a mental block until I'm able to utilize this more effectively, and he doesn't really get to that point until he's able to kind of learn some things from Endeavor, which was pretty sweet. Let's see. So that's kind of the end of where we get this kind of like mini tournament arc, which I enjoyed because we were able to see a lot of different kind of uses for quirks and how people are kind of like changing them up, how they're changing up their battle tactics. Even Deku with his kind of giant snafu of like, whoa, that's a pretty good and interesting thing. I was not expecting that completely with that kind of turn with his quirk, and that's going to lead some interesting kind of repercussions as he's going to be able to use other different kind of quirks, and how he's going to be able to jive that up with his classmates, because once he's able to start doing these things with all these other different kind of quirks, it is going to remind people of All For One, and they're going to be asking some questions of like, how is this guy able to utilize multiple quirks, especially when he had no quirks to begin with. And I'm like, alright, this is pretty cool. So then we get some kind of other ones that kind of like pop into effect. We get a nice little Christmas party where Aries popped up again, and she's kind of confusing different holidays and all that, which was freaking adorable. She got this like giant ass sword as a Christmas present because it was Secret Santa, and it was fucking awesome. I just really like seeing her character and seeing her kind of get better from the crazy situation that she was in, and still like hanging out with Mirio and Aizawa and figuring out all the different kind of stuff to do with them and all that. We also see that quirk enhancing drugs are being brought around. We see that Bakugo and Todoroki are able to get their provisional hero licenses and wipe this one dude's ass. We see that Sui and Uraraka are able to kind of like deal with this kind of shipment of like quirk enhancement drugs, as they're making sure that they don't really get to where they are supposed to get. It's like, okay, something's going on. Of course, this jives up with Hawks' stuff with the Meta Liberation Army kind of making moves and figuring out what to do, which dovetails into like the Endeavor arc, which is kind of like in the kind of winter portion, and we see that all the students are being pretty much put into work studies to pretty much train them up, because the Meta Liberation Army has been able to siphon off even other heroes and other people that they're supposedly like 100,000 strong, because Hawks was able to get this information to Endeavor. And so the government and hero teaching courses are deciding to pretty much fill in those ranks that they're losing to the Meta Liberation Army by effectively trying to speed up the process and get the students ready for this kind of fight. And it's just like, wow, it is a tough balancing situation. This is an interesting kind of moral dilemma. You have these disaffected people within your society, and they're deciding to make moves and do an attack plan. And do you then take these students and essentially turn them into child soldiers? It's a really kind of crazy scenario because, yes, you have been training them and everything, but then you aren't telling them what they're training for. You're probably putting them into positions that they're not ready for. You don't have the time to get the people that you really need or persuade them to your side. It's kind of a crazy scenario. I'm like, shit, this is gonna be fucking nutty as hell, man. So we see that all kind of driving up, and it's like, holy shit. And of course, Todoroki is the one that brings this up for Bakugo and Deku to join him at Endeavors. And at first they're thinking, like, Deku is just like, yeah, I'm good with doing all this kind of stuff. Bakugo's like, fuck this shit. I want to do the shit that I need to do. And at first you're thinking that Endeavor, who has a giant agency, he kind of like runs through. We see his kind of like support people and everything. It's kind of cool. And he actually starts taking them out. And we see how he does his heroing business. How he's constantly running around and in kind of almost a state of hyper-awareness. And I'm like, yeah. And I can understand why your family's kind of like in the position that it is because you have made your work your complete life. And I understand that, man. I get it. But they're like, yeah, your kind of goal here is to like get to a crime before me, as we see each of them trying to figure out how to get to certain places and to certain events faster. And him giving all three of them pointers on how to like help themselves get better. Todoroki and utilizing both of his flame and his ice more effectively. Bakugo being able to get faster and maneuver at better kind of speeds. And Deku for utilizing the quirk Black Whip. However, it's kind of cagey around, but he's able to utilize it more effectively as they go through, and they get to places to like stop things. Now, granted, it doesn't happen all at once, but they get to a point where we see that Endeavor invites them. Well, Todoroki's sister wants to invite them over, and they have a little bit of a nice dinner and a little bit of a bad dinner because Todoroki's other brother doesn't forgive their father for what he's done to him, but even though his sister's trying to get the family back together, and even Endeavor is like, listen, I see my family happy, but I'm not at the table. He's looking at it from like the outside. So he does want to try and help them, even to a certain extent of being like, hey, I'm going to make another house for you guys, and so that way when your mom gets out, you guys can be more effective and like help everything and all that. And the thing is, it does get to a point where like the brother's going back. He's like in college, and he gets kidnapped by this one dude who wanted Endeavor to pretty much kill him, but he was put in prison instead. And he's trying to like force this thing to be killed by Endeavor. And we see that, of course, the other three are able to stop everything effectively. Deku's able to utilize Black Whip pretty well, and Endeavor is like, sorry, and he's like, I'm just glad you're okay. And he knows that there's not much he can do to make right the wrongs that he's done, but he's going to attempt to do those things. There we go. Now, does that mean I like Endeavor? No. He's an interesting character, and I like to see kind of where this goes of how he's able to do these things, but no, I don't like him. I like Todoroki, I like Bakugo, and I like Deku. I'm like mainly a Class A, but I am interested in seeing what Endeavor's story kind of works out and seeing how he is able to be the number one hero. Alright, let's see. That pretty much ends that out, and then we shift over for some odd reason. It's not even divided up into thirds. It's like big chunk for the AB fight, a little bit smaller, but still bigger for the Endeavor arc, and then we move to the villains. And this is where it kind of stumbles for me. Because the pacing's kind of all over the place, and things escalate to a point that I'm like, you really should not have tacked this on at this end, and there are better ways to do it. So, we learn that Shigaraki, Tomura Shigaraki, he's trying to do stuff with the League of Villains, but the only way for him to get help from the Doctor, who is the ally of All For One, he's like, yeah, I want you to pretty much tame the dude that was pretty much his number one servant, Gigantomachia. And essentially, for a couple months, they're trying to, like, fight his ass to get him to recognize Todoroki. Not Todoroki. Fuck, man, that was a crazy... That would have been weird. Totoro? No. Tomura as, like, the successor for All For One. It's like, alright. They pretty much pushed themselves to the point of exhaustion and everything. And then out of nowhere, we see that the Meta Liberation Army for Deca City is like, yeah, we captured your, like, info dude. We chopped off all of his fingers. We invite you to our city to, like, talk shit out. And if you don't come, we'll fuck your shit up. Send heroes at you, what have you. It's like, oh, alright. Because one of the big things was this city had, like, disappeared in, like, a natural disaster, and it was pretty much hinted at throughout the whole thing going on this season, and then we see pretty much what happened. And we see that the villains go, and that it's pretty much a whole city under the control of the Meta Liberation Army, and they just start fighting the League of Villains. And in all honesty, the League of Villains should have had their asses handed to them. This would have been a nice kind of character building moment to have them, like, fucked up to where Tomura Shigaraki and his cadre are just beat to shit by the Meta Liberation Army, and fucking Gigantomachia, and then they have their own kind of training thing and see them go from there. That's not what happens here. See, the Meta Liberation Army has pretty much been like, use your quirks no matter what throughout your daily life. Those people should have been amped up and pretty much vastly better in utilizing their quirks and seeing any of their quirks kind of like evolve. However, they've decided to instead enhance and up the pacing and have pretty much all of the people that are brought, well, Shigaraki, Toga, and Twice have their powers pretty much upgraded in this thing, and it makes no sense how this is able to occur. Because it... Now granted, to the power scale that it's been done, they needed to do it to make them more effective at fighting Class A, and I understand that. That doesn't mean you get to do it at the end of this season and have it be done effectively and not called bullshit. Because honestly, amping them up this fast probably should have killed them more than anything because of how we have seen quirks work so far. I mean, if we were balancing this out, Deku should have been able to utilize Black Whip like that. Even though it is shown that his is done in the better way of like, okay, he utilizes it, he can't really control it, it kind of hurts him, and he's got to do some other kind of things. Here, there are some repercussions, but not enough to what is kind of going on, because we see the end with the Doctor pretty much amping up Tomura to be able to become the successor for All For One. But as we see throughout the city, he's pretty much just like kind of like destroying people and everything with his decaying ability. Twice is trying to figure out what's going on. Toga is kind of overwhelmed at a certain point, and they at first try to go for Twice for some reason, and we see that the leader of the Meta Liberation Army, apologies, Redestro, his quirk is tied to stress and everything like that, and essentially was kind of like a Hulk-like villain, except more tactical, but he was supposed to lose to Tomura, and he does. And let's see, first one, Twice is able to kind of get through his block and make a giant fuck ton of Twice's, but yet, because he is in love with Toga, or really cares for her, and doesn't want to see her hurt, and is able to, like, get her back, because she was pretty much fucked up. But then she kind of, this was also around the time that she is able to utilize her quirk. We get some backstories as well. She was like into blood, and I'm like, yeah, people shouldn't have like completely ostracize her, but be like, why are you drinking the blood and everything like that? Because she had a burn, was like, yeah. And then she like hit herself for like years and then fucking like attacks people and all that. I'm like, yeah, you're psychologically screwed up. I get that. People should have helped you. And the thing is, you're hurting people. And you're doing it because it pleases you. And it makes you happy. That ain't cool. Alright? And then her quirk ability, instead of just turning into Uraraka, she's able to utilize her quirk as well. And I think a copying quirk needs some limitations, and they just weren't able to effectively do them here with her. Because she's able to utilize your Uraraka's quirk almost on par with what she's pretty much been doing now, which I'm like, if you're not familiar with this quirk, you shouldn't be able to do that much with it in that short of a time. Like, Monoma doesn't seem that overpowered when you just... He's like, oh, okay, yeah, I can kind of do this. He tries to copy Deku's quirk and can't because it's like a dud because it has to be passed along. There's certain things that he can't really do with that. Even like Ares. But I'm like, alright. And then she, of course, passed out. Twice is able to kind of help her out and everything. And Tomura, then we get to see his whole backstory, which is tragic, but it really fucks up when his main goal is just the destruction of everything because he just likes to destroy things. I'm like, alright, that's pretty simple, but it's not really compelling. I understand that you've got the symbol of peace, Deku, and he needs his dark kind of side, but even All For One as the opposite symbol to All Might has more nuance, more character, and more defined goals than Shigaraki just wanting to destroy things. It's really kind of weird. I'm just like, well, you're not really that compelling when your pretty much goal is to just like destroy the world, no matter what. It's like, yeah, fuck. And the thing is, he had a messed up life. His father was the son of All Might's mentor, and to protect him, she kind of hid him away, and he completely and utterly resented heroes, and Tomura loved heroes and wanted to be a hero, and of course all the stress, he would scratch and everything. He didn't know what his quirk was until he was like crying because his sister pretty much threw him under the bus about like going in and looking at like a picture of their grandmother, and he accidentally killed the dog. He then starts accidentally killing his sister, his mother, his grandparents, but then actually wanted to kill his father and does. And you're like, okay, I kind of understand it. I don't agree with anything of doing it. And nobody, of course, stopped to help him as he's like wandering the streets with blood on his hands. I'm like, yeah, that's stupid. I would have been like, are you okay, kid? But granted, that's me. And then, of course, All For One's able to get him, pretty much utilize him to like kill people and be like, oh, this is a crazy little bastard kid who could like destroy things with a touch. Let's fucking do this shit out. And use the hands to pretty much like control him as much as possible. But then we see that he like during his fight with Redestro, he is able to unlock his memories and utilize it to a point where he doesn't even need to touch anything anymore to like destroy things, as he pretty much destroys Deka City, and like Gigantomachia pops up because the doctor's like, hey, you better kind of like help him out. It's like, oh god, this is so great, this is like my master. Hey. It's like, alright, cool. And Redestro is able to escape but has to sacrifice his legs, and he's like, no, okay, you effectively show our stuff, and we're going to give you the whole Meta Liberation Army, as he then calls it, the Paranormal Liberation Army, for a reason. So Shigaraki, throughout this, gains more power and gets control over an organization just like that. It's like, wow, that is really stupid. Now, my problem with this is not him getting that. It's just accelerated and executed poorly. My objection to it isn't where we end. It's how we got there, and how it doesn't really make that much sense for this dude who's pretty much been in politics and trying to do this and organize essentially a revolt against the government, and he gets his ass handed to him in one fight and then gives him all the resources to this kid that just wants to destroy everything. Okay. Hawks is like going around like, this is kind of fucked up, but I gotta do my thing. It's... I don't mind new kind of powers and everything like that, but in shonens, you have to be very careful with it. Even in Dragon Ball, there's some kind of like, what the fuck kind of shit goes on. Usually it happens to Vegeta's detriment. But almost at that point, that has become so much of an in thing in Dragon Ball that it's almost its own kind of thing, and you're like, alright, it's its own trope. It kind of always happens that way as Goku gets certain kind of things. Though they've gotten kind of better and interesting of trying to differentiate Goku's kind of path towards power and Vegeta's. But the main thing here with that kind of power escalation, with those kind of power moves, is you have to be careful. Otherwise, the escalation's just getting out of whack, and you've got to fight 37 gods because you've already fought, like, God 3 fucking seasons ago. And you're like, huh. Okay, what's a challenging kind of thing here now? Pardon me, excuse me, sorry. It's just, I understand that Shigaraki needed to get on Deku's kind of level, as he's getting better at utilizing One for All. However, I think they overshot him a bit too much, and they're going to have to do some tweaking and maneuvering to get Deku into a position that, I mean, at this point, I don't even know kind of what the effective limit of Tomura's powers are. I mean, as long as it's touching something, he can decay it. And I'm like, okay, how the fuck is Deku gonna fight that? Because we also see that, like, since Deku is able to utilize Black Whip effectively, All Might's like, hey, next you want to do the float one. That was his mentor's power. And then, of course, Bakugo's like, I've already done that shit. You're already behind me. Like, alright, whatever. Let's see. Other kind of things. So, I don't mind the villains getting their proper due and their origin stories and everything. It's just, it was too accelerated. The pacing was all over the place, and it wasn't as well done and executed as it needed to be. Let's see. Other bitty bits. It was interesting to see Aizawa and Mike talking to one of the Nomus and finding out that it was an experimented on friend that they had who they were going to form an agency with. And seeing them deal with that was pretty hardcore. I liked getting that backstory and getting that kind of stuff going on. So there is a lot of good in this season. It's just, it really sucked that at the end it was like, what the fuck are you doing? So hopefully that kind of evens out in, like, the next seasons. Because I was like, ooh, that... I've had some stuff that's like, alright, I've overall been pretty much enjoying this anime. And then, especially this season, and then we get here and it's like, okay, you're showing some potential problems. Please understand that and kind of, like, learn from that. Hopefully it doesn't become too big of a problem and too big of an issue. But, can't wait to see what they do with our heroes and the villains in the next season. And I'm looking forward to seeing the movie at some point. So, like, yeah. That was my only kind of, like, also gripe, is that Toonami, like, put some hiatus for, like, the last couple episodes. I'm like, damn it. Because I was thinking, oh boy, I'll finish the season and then try and figure out a way to see the movie. And it's like, alright, I'm gonna have to wait a little bit more. Alright, that's okay. So, I will see it eventually. But, yeah, we'll see how it kind of works out. So, overall, I enjoyed this season and would still recommend it, even though it gets really weird towards the end. So those are my opinions on the season. Tell me what you guys think in the comments below. If you liked it, if you didn't like it, if you agree with me, if you disagree with me. Also like and subscribe, and I hope you have a good day.